Somebody knows something we believe, that we know in our heart. So we're just asking that the person will come forward.
Our guest today is someone who has dedicated her life to the pursuit of justice and education. Judith A. Yates is a criminologist with over 35 years of experience. But she's more than just an expert. She's an award-winning crime author whose work brings clarity and depth to some of the darkest corners of human behavior. Beyond her writing, Judith is a tireless volunteer, contributing her expertise to cold cases and missing persons investigations. For over 2 decades, she has passionately educated people on crimes against children, a mission that has taken her across the United States as a lecturer and teacher. Judith's commitment to justice and advocacy is unwavering, and her insights offer invaluable lessons for all of us. Welcome to the show, Judith.
Thank you. Boy, that makes me sound busy, doesn't it?
It really does, yes. Yes, I am so glad that you're able to come and share your expertise and your knowledge with us about the Asha Degree case. Here at Cleveland County Valentine, that is definitely the focus of our podcast. All of our episodes are dedicated to learning more about her and educating our listeners about her story.
That's wonderful. That's good. That's a little girl that needs to be worried about, what am I wearing to school tomorrow, or what am I getting for my birthday, or what games are there out now, instead of being missing. And instead of making it entertainment, we really need to focus on what happened, and this is someone's child and loved one.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I agree. With that being said, what are some of your impressions about the investigation so far?
Well, every case deserves the best attention, and I do believe that's being done. There's a lot of information that is not going to be shared, and so we, the public, are only going to know so much. I'm betting the investigators have much, much more that cannot be shared. So we're only going to know so much. And I'm thinking the investigators have so much material that cannot be released. I would go as far to say they probably have a good suspect and are trying to prove it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've read and heard people arguing over a tiny tidbit of information. They're convinced their theory is absolute. They know more than investigators know, blase, blase. And I just leave it, because, as I used to tell my class on investigations, don't try to make it fit, let it fall in place.
Mm-hmm.
So I would put money on that these investigators are letting pieces fall in place while they garner even more information.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. What is your opinion on maybe some of the key red flags or the inconsistencies in this case?
There's going to be those in any case, especially missing cases, because investigators are never going to get the whole story from the family and friends of the missing. Volunteer groups, law enforcement, we're all going to get different stories from everyone who's a potential witness. For example, I would not be 100% on the witnesses who stated that they observed this little girl walking at night in the rain along a road. It doesn't jive with her personality that we've been told. We've been told she's afraid of storms, she's afraid of the dark, dogs, etc. And I could be wrong. I just feel it in my bones that I wouldn't jive with that. People sometimes either want to do something to help, particularly if it's a little child. Sometimes people will claim to be witnesses to get their 1 minute of fame. They want to be somehow involved in the case. If you remember that one guy that turned himself in as John Bonet's killer, and I said, nah, he's not the one. He's a fan club, member. And that was true. He just wanted to have his name associated with the case. And I'm not saying at all that these witnesses are lying by any means, or they think they saw what they saw. People want to help.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you hear an Amber Alert, for example, you're going to start scrambling your brain. Okay, where is this? What is this? How can I help? It's part of our human nature.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's going to be inconsistencies.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not saying they're lying. I'm not saying they didn't see it. I'm saying that you always want to question something like that.
Right, because I know when we interviewed Dr. Cutler on the show, who is a professional with witness testimony, and he brought up a good point in that if you're an adult and you see a child who obviously looks to be under the age of 10 and they're alone, right? Because normally children are seen with an adult, whether it's their teacher or it's their parent or an older sibling of some sort. You rarely see children by themselves. And so if you are to come across a child, especially one in the middle of the night, if they're alone, that obviously that sends some sort of signal to your brain that this child is lost. It has to be, right? Because children normally are not seen alone, and particularly at night, in the middle of the night, in a storm, because a good thought would have been, did anyone think she was missing? And it appeared that one of the truck drivers did not think she was missing, just thought maybe she could have been going to her bus stop or going to a friend's house or a neighbor's house or something, and that's what he believed. But Dr. Cutler just said that, generally our minds don't really work that way. So it seems more likely that he would have had to have had the thought or the belief that, this girl may be in trouble for her to be out this way.
Yeah, and you got to think, I don't recall for example, speed limit on that road
Hmm.
in dark, in the rain. You're focusing on not going off the road. You're focusing, hopefully, on the safety
Hmm.
aspect of it. Or maybe you're texting while you're driving and having a cigarette and some bonbons, but nonetheless,
Hmm.
your focus isn't going to necessarily be on the half second, 3 seconds, something that's occurring on the side of the road like that. And I don't know the setup because I've never been to the actual
Hmm.
site. So I would want to know that before I, went further with it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, definitely a good point. Especially with the speed limit. I hadn't thought about what the speed limit is in that area. It's definitely a rural two-lane road with traffic going in in either direction, so not a one way. But yeah, you kind of bring me to my next point. In many of the reports that I've read, and I'm sure a lot of us have, is, Aisha was described as sheltered and protected. So not doesn't really sound like the type to have been out on the road in the middle of that night in particular. Yet her disappearance suggests otherwise. How do you reconcile this contradiction, and what do you think it reveals about this case?
I'm not sure I under the contradiction of.
Well, just the contradiction that, she was described, even as her parents, as someone who may have been sheltered and protected by her family. She has a large network of family members that lived on in that community, in that residential neighborhood that she lived in. Yet her disappearance, as such of her being, out in the middle of the night during a storm and rain, kind of doesn't make her sound like a child who would have been one that was sheltered and protected, if that makes sense. Maybe someone who
Gotcha,
had even
gotcha.
been
Okay.
out before. Hmm.
Well, here's the biggest problem with missing cases. Your sources are not going to be 100% truthful.
Hmm.
No one ever wants to say, my boyfriend's been molesting my kid, I did nothing about it. Or
Hmm.
the best friend of the missing person doesn't want to tell a secret and be a snitch in case they're
Hmm.
found again.
Hmm.
Or you have people that, for example, a case I volunteered on, it took years before the parents would even admit that their missing kid, she was 13, 14, was sneaking out at night and
Hmm.
smoking cigarettes.
Hmm.
And they didn't want us to think that the little girl was a bad girl or that they were bad parents. You know, she's 13. She's diving out of the window of her bedroom to meet her little friends between houses to, and nobody is going to tell you 100% the truth all the time. See, we all live three lives: our public life, our private life, and then there's that little private story that we each have that we rarely or never share. And people aren't happy or want to, especially with law enforcement, to share that little piece of their very private lives, their little self lives, I guess you'd call it. And notice when a child goes missing, these positive words, only positive words are used to describe them. They were a happy child. They were a sheltered child. They loved their family. They liked to laugh, blase, blase. And, people are going to tell us what they want us to know. They're not going to say, well, he was an addict, he was slinging dope. They're going to say, well, he was very happy and he loved his friends. And those are critical pieces of information for investigators and for volunteers. So again, we only know what we're told from the public up to the investigator standpoint. Now, why would it take years and years to say, well, okay, I admit it, my 13-year-old daughter was sneaking cigarettes? Because they don't want people to know that they're raising a kid that sneaks out at night to smoke cigarettes. They want us to believe this person made straight A's all the time, was happy, was joyous, sang in the church choir on Sundays, never had a fight with their parents in their life. And so the information might not jibe because it doesn't. And that's one of the key issues in this case and all missing cases, actually.
So when you say, the public life versus the private life, do you think that is even pertains to law enforcement? Like, do you think that they too have the same viewpoint of Asha Degree's life as what we have all, as in the public, have gotten from the media?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we all have those three lives.
But do you think that as far as Asha goes, that they believe the same thing about Asha, or do they have something different about Asha?
No, that's we all know that. We all know that there's a part of their people's lives, like, I'm the mayor of Whoville. And then I'm the mayor of Whoville and I beat my wife. And then there's I'm the mayor of Whoville, I beat my wife and I like to wear women's shoes. So we all know there's those three lives that are in one person. And that's therein lies a challenge, is to find out what that third life is.
Yeah. Okay. So jumping around a little bit, in your experience, how often are children's disappearances connected to someone within their close circle? And, do you believe that maybe Asha's case may sort of fit that pattern?
It is a fact that less than 10% of child abductors are complete strangers. Less than 10%. However, of course, it's the one that we hear about the most because it makes the best news, quite frankly. The first group to look at in any crime will be family and close friends. That's a given, because they're the ones who are spending the most time with this individual. Then we're going to fan out to look at the missing child's environment. Teachers, classes, friends, families, who do you play with? What are their families doing? The next door neighbor, the guy who, we used to have ice cream trucks when I was a kid. So I'll say ice cream truck driver and people go, what? I don't work on this case. And so I don't feel comfortable saying they need to look at, what I'm saying? And I'd never accuse anyone that I don't know. That was done in the Delphi case by so many armchair investigators, and it damn near ruined a man's life. So I don't want to do that. But yes, definitely you would look at who is around the child the most and their relationship. And no relationship is ever going to be good and bad. Oh no, we had a great relationship. Well, did you fight? Oh no, not at all. Okay, that's your kid.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There are times when I could take my 20 something daughter's throat in my hand and shake her like a kitten,
Mm-hmm.
because the stupid stuff. But every parent and child fights, whether they're in
Mm-hmm.
their 20s or in their 10s or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Um, so right away we know, okay, there's an issue there.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. I agree with that also. Just within this case, I think what has been given to the public is that her circle was very small, it was pretty tight, and it only really included outside of school was her immediate family, her extended family, and like her church family. So especially for a child of that age, it doesn't appear that she would have had a large circle anyhow, and especially since that circle happened to stay in her residential community, with this being a rural town, it's probably more common that you may live amongst your, like your grandparents and things of that nature. I did not. I grew up in a large city, and my grandparents lived across town, for example. So I could see for this case how that may be just a bit different. Um, so moving on to just the details that we do know of Aisha's case, do you believe that law enforcement missed any critical steps early in the investigation?
Well, every case you're going to miss information.
Hmm.
We're talking about the human race, and
Hmm.
we all screw up. Sometimes we screw up real good.
Hmm.
Sometimes we screw up with raisins, and then sometimes it's just a little puff. But I was discussing a case from my book, which was the Paul Reed serial killer case, on a national talk show, and I was asked to say or comment if the cops dropped the ball on the investigation. Could he have been caught sooner? Does that happen? Sure. Life isn't a TV show.
Hmm.
And you have to understand that, and I was told this when I was very little, and I've kept it. Cops are people too.
Hmm.
It's not like, uh, for example, lie detectors. Lie
Hmm.
detectors are tools. They won't solve a case all of themselves, but they can help. And lie detectors aren't the end all be all. My mom
Hmm.
had to take one for a job interview once, and she was so nervous the results showed
Wow.
she lied about her name. You know, they lied about her name and her age and just everything should come out of her mouth. Uh, but I've also seen guilty people just sail through one.
Hmm.
Well, he passed the lie detector. Well, okay, you know. It's very easy, for example, when you do a search, it's easy to miss items during a search. You
Hmm.
are depending on the weather, you're depending on the terrain, and the people searching. What are we looking for? How can we find it? Especially in really challenging terrain like grass, weeds, woods, debris field. Search dogs, I love search dogs. They're so amazing and they're amazing to watch, but they're also tools. They have their limits.
Hmm.
So we're given the tools to do the job in the best way that we can at the time. And that's just the lay of the land. That's just the way it works.
Yeah.
We searched that area 100 times. Okay, walk through, for example, the side of the road
Hmm.
and see what all is there and what you're dealing with, especially if there's weeds and sticker bushes and that kind of challenge.
Yeah. What do you think are some of the most the most common challenges when working on cold cases? You mentioned doing some volunteer work with cold cases, but particularly those that are involving children.
Probably the biggest one is people don't want to tell you the whole truth.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I've seen so many things where, well, why didn't you tell us that in the first place? I volunteered on a case where the child who was missing and endangered had kept a diary, and the parents tossed the diary because there were things in there about the parents that they didn't want
Mm.
known. I don't care if you're slinging dope right now. I don't care if you cheated on your taxes. What did this child say in her diary? What did she feel like? Who was she angry at?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's probably the biggest one.
Mm-hmm. And so, do you think that, kind of going to into my next question, that why that may be that roughly 85% of cases could be solved if people closer to the victim cooperated more fully, is that they don't want to reveal some things that may paint them in a negative light?
Oh yeah, yeah. Again, we're going to go back up to that number of 10% or less estimated are actual stranger abductions, where, the only people that are going to know about this abduction right now are the stranger and the child.
Mm-hmm.
So that means we've got about 90% of known abductions. Most of those are going to be in a custody dispute. And it might last a day, it might last 10 years, 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And see, so many people believe that just because you bear a child, you want to be a parent.
Mm-hmm.
And that is absolutely not true.
Hmm.
Or they believe that you love your child unconditionally. But we are told so many of this family life is a Hallmark TV show stories. And so when something bad happens, that child's family, close ones, they want to be that Hallmark family.
Mm-hmm.
And then people like us are saying, I can never harm my child. How could a mother hurt a child? We can't assume everyone is like us, that we
Mm-hmm.
love our children, that we die for our children. And therein lies the problem. If the adult would just say, okay, look, I've been hitting this child because I'm doing a lot of cocaine, blah, 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 but they're not going to tell cops that.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that third person inside you? They're not going to
Mm-hmm.
tell the cops
Mm-hmm.
anything they're doing wrong. And I can guarantee you, in that large amount of missing child cases, someone close to that child, meaning a parent or a caregiver, knows what happened
Mm-hmm.
or has an idea,
Mm-hmm.
a good idea of what happened. And I
Yeah.
believe that with personally, and I believe in it professionally, simply because that's how it rolls. Um, a child comes, the case of, for example, Casey Dugard, where she was
Mm-hmm.
snatched off the street by these freakos.
Mm-hmm.
Those parents knew nothing about that. They had no idea that, this would happen. Nobody does. But in the case of, say, a Ramsey case, for
Mm-hmm.
example, I believe wholeheartedly that someone in that house knows
Mm-hmm.
what happened.
Yeah.
They know more than they're saying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, speaking of the Ramsey case, I know we've touched on it a couple of times, but what do you think about this? Because, John Ramsey was 6 years of age when she was murdered in her home, obviously in a different part of the U.S. than when Aisha went missing from. Aisha was from a rural area of North Carolina. John was from a Boulder, Colorado, and a more affluent family and neighborhood. But aside from that, do you see any significant similarities between Aisha's case and John case in terms of just maybe public perception or investigative challenges or even evidence?
Yeah, the Ramsey case was a media circus. It was a freaking three-ring circus, and
Mhm.
that is unfortunate. How many books have been written about the Ramsey case? You know,
Right. Hmm.
I lived next door to the people
Hmm.
who knew that the Ramseys went to church.
Hmm.
Bing, I got a bestseller. Uh, Movies made about the case.
Hmm.
And when you have a case like this that everybody wants to solve, it
Hmm.
can be a blessing and a curse. Someone, I love that saying, someone knows something. Well, of course they do.
Hmm. Yeah.
you know, we all know something about the case. And the bottom line, really, is they're both little children that were harmed.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter one iota that one, I'm talking emotionally here. It doesn't matter that one was living in a 7,500 square foot house.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't a game show. It isn't a TV show. This is a child's life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they're saying, well, both cases, they were little girls, tight knit families and I add that we know of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Societal biases, assumptions about families, yes, they always play a role. And again, we can bless it or we can curse it because it's such huge news. I think, well, I saw that little girl. I saw that little girl at the grocery store. She does look familiar. Or I just want to get involved because I want to solve this, because I want to write my own book and be a millionaire,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So again, media attention, lack thereof, that is going to definitely influence a lot of progresses, but it's not going to influence, I hope, the amount of time and investigation spent in looking for solving these cases.
Mm-hmm. Right. I agree. I agree with that. Do you think that either case has a stronger likelihood of being solved in the near future, and why do you feel that way?
That's hard to answer because, they thought JC was lost forever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but families still held hope. People still
Mm-hmm.
held hope. There's hope that people will find Jimmy Hoffa. Okay, maybe somewhere, somehow, there's a clue floating that we missed. But I could say yes, I could say no. That would just be my opinion. Let's just leave it at that. I think every case has the potential to be solved,
Mm-hmm.
from the Kennedy assassination to, who took the knife and shot them in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it can be solved. Let's put it that
Mm-hmm.
way. There's a
Okay.
lot of potential for it to be solved.
Okay. What patterns or behaviors have you observed in perpetrators of crimes against children, and how can communities use that information to protect vulnerable populations?
I wrote a handbook called How to Recognize the Devil, and it teaches what I call common sense self-defense. There's a large chapter on educating children on safety without creating fear, and I drew from not just research, but from interviews with child predators. And my first book was called The Devil You Know. It's about a child abduction and a horrible murder. It won an award. It's the reason I kept writing, because I included a chapter on child predators because the predator was a predator. But
Mm-hmm.
so many people never, I'm seeing this so backward. I included a chapter on child predators and the red flags to watch for, because the killer was definitely a child predator, but
Mm-hmm.
so many people around him said, oh, not Doug.
Mm-hmm.
And even the cops he confessed to didn't believe him
Mm-hmm.
because, oh, no, not Doug. And that book is called The Devil You Know. Now, the most important pattern of behavior is they can blend in so well. We go around looking for the creepy guy in the trench coat in the bushes because
Mm-hmm.
we've been taught that for so long. And there is no creepy guy in the bushes. There's the dad, the brother, the coach. The perpetrator can be a male, female, convicted felon, or the choir director who has a good cookie recipe. That's the title, The Devil You Know, because that's who the perpetrators are. And that's the title, How to Recognize the Devil, because devils walk around us all the time, just like angels do. And that is the key, is they can blend in
Mm-hmm.
because they are the people around us.
Mm-hmm.
The location where my first book took place, it's a very small town. And after the book was released, I offered to travel there and do a free presentation on predatory behavior and recognizing the signs. No book sales, no mention of the book. I just wanted to give them the tools. Guess what I was told?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen here.
Hmm.
Guess what? The perpetrator has been released from prison and lives in that town now.
Mm.
The perpetrator who tricked that little boy, murdered him, that no one thought would do a bad thing, he lives in that town now. And people have to want to learn that nasty truth to recognize the evil. That is the most important step. The second most important, use the information. I worked a case where a teacher was molesting his students. And the victim's parents, when I interviewed them, they said, well, we're not going to press charges and we don't want to be interviewed because we're just going to pray for him, meaning the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
The school lets him retire early. There's no charges, no repercussions. They had those tools, but they were afraid to use them. So perpetrators know this. I'm also interviewing a lifelong child predator right now for a workbook for law enforcement. And he is very open and honest. He loves to talk about his crimes. And that's, you look at this guy and you think, oh, okay. He doesn't look like you would, want to be afraid of him. He's a little strange, but who isn't? And that's his MO is one, he does look quote unquote normal. And two, the secret.
Right.
See, that's the number one tool of a perpetrator against children is you keep the secret.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to learn how to teach our children they can tell us these secrets, and we've got to recognize that these perpetrators could be anyone.
Right.
Oh, he's too nice. Oh, girls don't do that. Which is bull, because yes, they do, and yes, they will.
Right. And that's a tough one, I think, to maybe come to terms with for a lot of us, is that the person is often not who we think they are. It's someone that does blend in fairly well with the community and our neighborhoods and such.
Oh yeah, this guy. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
This guy in my first book, he was a nice guy. He was a quiet guy. He was the guy who was always playing sports with the teenage boys in the school basketball court, because literally that's all you have to do there is sports. If you're a kid and you're not in sports, you sit around. But this was the guy who would this was the guy that was so polite, so quiet. They'd see him in the store and they'd say, "Hey, Doug," and he would nod and kind of smile. Not Doug.
Right.
That's what I was told by almost everyone I interviewed. But here's what's interesting. See, Doug's social circle were teenagers. And girls told me he always creeped me out. The guys told me, well, he was just part of the crowd. Well, was there anything that stuck out about him that one time you said, A few of the guys told me yes, but most of them said no. And all the adults I talked to, even law enforcement, they first stopped by his trailer with the mindset of, oh, this guy isn't going to know anything, but we'll ask him anyway. Because that's just how he is. So yeah, there's that behavior of the fitting in, and the perpetrator I'm interviewing now has told me some very disgusting things. How he would either groom children. He's more of a perpetrator of chance, of the possibilities there, and it's everything from babies to young females up to 15.
Wow.
He knows how to get around people, how to not get caught.
Tell us one misconception about cold case investigations that you wish the public understood better?
That a kid with a computer can solve it by themselves from the basement.
Why do you think
There,
that?
sometimes all it takes is a pair of what we call fresh eyes.
Hmm.
Because when you have read and looked and interviewed, I just finished a book that took about 4 years to finish. And when I'm rereading it, I'm not even reading it. I'm thinking about,
Hmm.
what am I going to do for dinner? I need to go to the store. I need to feed the horses. I'm not reading about Irma Greza. So
Hmm.
that's why I've had 3 or 4 editors.
Hmm.
There's my fresh pair of eyes. And a case is the same thing.
Hmm.
You sift through the file. Maybe your eye catches something different this time. Maybe you set it off to the side and say, okay, I need to go outside and get some air. You come back and you go, wait, look at that right there in front of me. Or something jumps out at you. Just bang. It's almost frightening how sometimes things will just, or a witness feels safer talking to you now than they did before.
Hmm.
Or they feel safer talking to you instead of the other person. And it's not like on TV or the movies,
Hmm.
where bing, or you meet in this clandestine. It's people. We're all people. Investigators are people. Cops, everybody involved. And sometimes, and it's just like in life, when you're looking at something and you put it down and you might come back to it and boom, there's something different.
Hmm.
So it's not, a genius who who comes in on the crime scene, waves his hand over it, and goes, "This happened, that
Hmm.
happened. Did anybody notice that dead elephant laying in the middle of the room, or the street? Oh my God, you're a genius. We didn't see that." So it's not like that, and we need to understand that again. These are people. Everybody missing is someone's child,
Hmm.
someone's a loved one. And we've got to start looking at it like that instead of something entertaining.
Hmm.
And we've got to start looking at, yes, things can be solved.
Agreed, agreed. So we've got a lot of different theories about, or we've read and we've heard about different theories about what could have triggered her to leave that night. It appears that it could have been, her departure or being separated from her home was a separate event from, any potential encounter with um, those that may have abducted her or something similar to of that nature. Um, from that, what do you believe could have triggered her to leave that night if that was something that happened, if, she did leave, in fact, voluntarily?
Oh, God, anything. When you're a kid,
Hmm.
especially at that age, you know everything.
Hmm. Hmm.
Your parents are stupid, and life is just so unfair. So it could be something as simple as, I don't want to do my homework and you're being mean to me by making me do my
Hmm.
homework. Or it could be as complex as I am being horrifically abused and I got to get out of here. But I don't
Hmm.
want to tell the rest of the family.
Hmm.
I am going to go out on a huge limb here and say, in my opinion, based on what I know, I would be hard pressed to say that kid left that property.
And why do you think that?
Just given what I know, everything we've just discussed here, probabilities, um, the nature of what we know about her personality,
Hmm.
the the situation. Okay, let's look at what folks are arguing and saying.
Hmm.
Middle of the night, the girl that is afraid of storms, dogs in the dark, packs a backpack and leaves the house and walks down. How far away? Remind me, how far away was she from her house at or about when they saw her reportedly walking down the highway?
It's about a mile away.
Okay. And how old?
9.
9. Okay. And she just had a big ball game that afternoon or that day?
That would have been Saturday morning that she had that
Okay.
basketball game. Hmm.
Okay. 9 years old, in the dark, in a rainstorm, walking down a highway a mile from your house. Maybe, depending on the personality. I mean, is she the type of kid that just takes off, and can.
Hmm.
I know when I was a kid, man, we'd get our bicycles and we would take off. But I think the farthest we got was maybe a mile.
Hmm.
Of course, we're suburban kids, so we're suburbia kids whose mom said, "Come in before the street light comes on." But then you've got kids that will, like a friend of mine who used to sneak out through the front door and meet her little buddies on the curb and talk and giggle, and then sneak
Hmm.
back in. So you've got all, depending on how the child is. But let's go with what we are told. So you got this little kid, middle of the night, again, storming, dark, packs her backpack, somehow goes out of the house. A mile down the road is seen walking along the side of the road. Someone turns around and they run into the woods, just blindly runs into the woods. And then poof, she's gone. It's not a magic show. Nobody actually disappears. But again, here's what we know. What are the probabilities of that versus something happening to this kid in a home where it's not raining inside and it's not storming inside and it's late at night? If that the last time we saw her was, if that is true.
Hmm.
Or was there a perfectly simple explanation like you just gave? So think about probability.
Hmm. I I know everyone likes to talk about that basketball game that happened on Saturday morning. And I think because the parents had said that she got over that loss pretty quickly, something that I haven't really seen mentioned a lot or really at all is Valentine's Day in the sense of Valentine's Day parties. Normally on Monday, or in general, if you're a kid of that age in elementary school, your school is having Valentine's Day parties and you're exchanging Valentine's Day cards and candy and that kind of thing. And I recall that her fourth grade teacher remembering that day and said that they had a planned party that day. And so one that got me to thinking that would she have missed that party, you know? That was one thing. And then the other thought is I think there was a report that Mr. Degree had went to the convenience store or something that night to get candy. And I don't know that it was ever mentioned if Aisha received any Valentine's Day cards to exchange on Monday with her class. And I wondered if maybe, you know, if she left, if she ran away from home, did she leave because she was upset that she didn't get any Valentine's Day cards or candy? That, for some reason, could make some sense to me because it would have been the following day, would have been Monday in class. The basketball game, to me, I don't think that would have been a trigger, but I could maybe see Valentine's Day, you know, exchanges, candy, something about that in class, possibly. It still, for me, is a long way. But as far as a trigger, other than maybe, yeah, I guess just that time of night, that is just one thought that I've had. If I were to kind of see that as something that really did happen that way, maybe that would have been one of those things. But I just haven't seen the Valentine's Day being a possibility.
Well, if it stuck out to you, then it means something. and you're
Yeah.
using past experiences in your own life also to make that deduction.
Hmm.
Do you have children around that age?
No, I don't. And that's the thing because you know, Aisha's life doesn't sound anything like mine at that age. And, I would have never run away. And I read it all the time about people talking about their runaway stories. They're sort of kind of runaway where they leave and then they come right back. I never did that. I never had the desire, never at that age, I never had that desire to run away. I think I remember looking out the window and because watched something on TV, a cartoon about how they would, run away with a stick and a flag or and put their clothes in it or something. Like that was my idea of what running away looked like. But I never left my front door to go anywhere, especially in the middle of the night. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why I have a hard time seeing it happen because it never occurred to me. And I had a brother like she does, and but of course, he was much older than me. And no one ever upset me that much to the point, where I would have left under any circumstances in the middle of the night. And I was afraid of storms, so there was no chance you would have got me out there. So I think, I think that part does sort of speak to me in terms of like, could she, would she kind of deal.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to what I explained earlier, how we superimpose our lives in on
Hmm.
our victims' lives, and when I was her age, I decided one day I was going to run away from home. Why? I don't know. I was the only child. I was the first grandchild. I was
Hmm.
the first baby in the neighborhood. So I was so terribly indulged. I didn't realize it then, but nonetheless, I decided life sucked and I was going to run away. So I took a quarter and I went to the Lone Star Ice House and bought myself some candy because I told my family that's what I was going to do. And then I took the long way home because I thought this is it. But I had no concept of what that meant. I was just more like, I'll show them. And then the longer I walked, I was more tired. I was like, okay, well, that's it. I'm going home, eat the
Hmm.
candy, sit by myself, and think about how horrible my life is. Um, you're kids, and you're kind of where you are. You're a sponge, and you're also an open vessel. Why the hell would I run away? I got
Hmm.
everything I wanted. I always had somebody falling out over me, wanting to buy me a treat or a toy or something. So, but that's my runaway story. So I would, if I were to implement that in this case, it's just kids do crazy stuff. They really
Hmm.
do. And did she decide in the middle of the night, that's it? Or the Valentine's thing that you brought up, losing the basketball game. What were the repercussions of losing that game? Did your parents screech at you? Did your relatives think you were stupid because you lost?
Hmm.
Did your coach single you out? Okay,
Hmm.
look at this pattern prior to. Let's just make up a pattern. All right. Um, I didn't get a Valentine. The coach yelled at me and called me names in front of everybody. Um, they wouldn't let me watch my favorite program on TV. I had to do my homework before I could go play with my friend. My parents were drunk and passed out, and I had to get the cigarettes out of their hands because the house could burn down again.
Hmm.
Now, again, this is just a supposition. This is a
Hmm.
completely pretend situation. Let's say all of these things are going on in a child's life, and it just keeps going. And finally, it's like, you know what? Eff it. I'm out of here.
Hmm.
It also depends on the maturity of this kid. I've
Hmm.
interviewed 9 year olds that they might as well have been 40. Then I've interviewed 40 people, 40-year-old people that were 9. So it depends on this child's maturity and have they
Hmm.
done this before.
Hmm.
I would want to know, who has this child been talking to outside of family, friends. I would want to know who is in this person's life. what this child's personality consisted of. I would go through that kid's bedroom like a beast, like a little ferret, because I want to know what's going on. Now, kids don't really keep diaries at that age in this date and time like we used to, but there's going to be somewhere, somehow, a record of something, written record. And this business about, well, we see bad things on TV or so we don't let them have a computer. Kids are going to find one. They're going to find one.
Yeah. That's one of the things, is that they said that there was no home computer. And I remember Mrs. Degree was quoted as saying in the Jet magazine that, her family didn't own a computer, just because of every time she turned on the TV, there was a child being lured away by some predator, pedophile or something. And so it sort of seemed like she was saying, well, and then look what happened in our case. Even though we didn't own a computer, it seemed that could have been what happened anyways, that she was lured away from some kind by a type of predator of some sort, because we were safe and her community was very small. Her circle was very small. She just had church, basketball, school, and she's got this family that's surrounded by her. So the only people, it would seem like, based off what that they've shared, that she may have had a lot of access to, or they may have had access to her, was the family, the extended family, school, church, basketball. I don't know what else outside of that, but that's all we've been given as far as who her connections were and who she may have been able to speak to at that time, and just the access that was going on in her own home.
Yeah, and again, we're saying, okay, well, who did they know? Who had a computer at their home? Did they let them use it? Were they supervised? There's just so many questions that, okay, well, my kid isn't allowed to. Right. Okay. Well, go ahead and believe that, because it's going to happen. One of my kids that I wrote about, bullied to death. The little girl, the family was very, very strapped for cash. And of course, the cool thing to do when you're 14, 15 years old is to have a cell phone, not just a cell phone, an Uber, Apple, iPod, iThing, a cell phone. And the little girl's parents still had the old-fashioned flip phone type of phone. So they were saying, well, that's the only phone that she has access to, blah, blah, blah. Well, then the little girl gets caught. She had stolen a cell phone and had kept it well hidden from the family, not because she's a bad little girl, because she wants a cell phone to be like the cool kids, because she's already got all kinds of, 10 kinds of hell going on, and she wants to try to fit in. So you can't say, well, my child isn't, unless they are kept 24/7 locked in a basement with, grilled cheese sandwiches. You cannot say my child has no access to, because the friends have cell phones, or there's computers at school, or you can just take one, or you can save up your allowance and buy. So it's just so many factors of, and I'm not blaming the parents at all. I'm saying that children will find a way.
Yeah. Begin wrapping up here. One of our last questions is, how would you approach separating the timeline of events to kind of identify maybe where the truth lies? So just her leaving her home and then this possible encounter later on. Is there a particular approach from that regard?
Okay, I got you. Timeline it. And okay, this is when this happened. This is when they last say, okay, I'll give you an example. Chardonnay said she saw Elisa at 10 o'clock Sunday night. Rachel said she saw Elisa at 6 o'clock Sunday night. Jessica Chastain said she saw Elisa at 12 noon, there or about. Okay, let's timeline that. Now, what was the child doing? What was the child wearing? Alisa, what was she doing, wearing, saying? How did she enter your space? How did she exit your space? All right, let's go from there. Then I would put, let's see, I would go about it logically and not emotionally. But emotion always lurks wherever logic lies. So that's easier said than done. Nonetheless, and you would start timelining it. When was this person seen by X, Y, and Z? What were they doing? What were they wearing? What were they telling you? What did you talk about? The first person says, oh, they were talking about how much they hated losing that basketball game because the coach was being bitchy. Okay. And my next person says, oh, she was talking about the Valentine's Day dance and nobody asked her to dance. Okay, let's go from there. The next person says, well, she went into her house and I was still outside. And that was probably at 6 o'clock when she went in. And I went inside around 8:30 or so. Did you see her at all? Oh, no. Okay, who's inside the house? Well, she came in at this time. She did this, and then she went to bed. You see what I'm saying? So I'm putting it all in chronological order, and we're going to go from there.
Yeah. hmm I think with her case, there's definitely a lot of differences in time that we read from the parents and just kind of moving on into the investigation. And I feel like on one hand that that's just about maybe misreporting. And so I don't know how much to give that any weight, right? I think one of the things that came out that I think the public had learned recently is on the 23rd anniversary, I think, I can't recall exactly, Mrs. Degree had mentioned that the aunt and uncle had came by that evening when the power had went out in their community to let her know that hey, the power is out, and her and her husband, the aunt and uncle, they hung around for a little bit. But early on in the investigation, and the Shelby Star was quoted as Mrs. Degree was quoted as saying that no one had came by that evening that they know of. So I don't know if you've kind of got this sort of like misreporting thing, and it's not to say that we think any of that is intentional, right? But it does kind of change a timeline for people who are actually kind of looking into the case and researching the case, because that kind of changes things. If you first say that there's no one that came by that night, and then 20 something years later comes up that, oh, actually, an aunt and uncle came by that night. Did they come by that night, or is that like a misremembering thing? Maybe it was a different night altogether. Um, and then it also seems like maybe, do they feel pressure to say more about that timeline? So there's all these different things, all these different variables that are kind of floating around when you're reading timelines, because you don't know what to take and what not to take as factual, like this is exactly how it went. There's a lot of different inconsistencies, and so it's hard to know, to
Okay,
narrow
I have two
down,
questions for you, playing advocate
what is and
here.
what isn't in that case.
Why would someone come by to tell you your power is out?
I think that's kind of strange a little bit, because obviously the power is out. I don't know if it could have been also about there being a car accident that happened down the road, and that's in fact what knocked out the power, was the car accident. Um, but I don't know if how close this aunt and uncle was to the Degrees that, maybe did they try to call, and obviously they couldn't get a signal in, so they walked across the street or whatever, and just to say, hey, it went off. That's the way that it's sort of being positioned. That is my perception that I took, from that conversation to make that
Well,
fit
it could be,
anyways.
again,
But obviously,
it
right,
could be
the
one of
power's out.
several cats. It could be, hey, our power's out. Is y'all's? Or I just stopped by. There's a bad car wreck up the road. Looks like it's knocked out all the power. Or it could
hmm
be, hey, check your power. It's out. Now,
hmm
how was it said? What was it said? When did they walk in? Let me try this here. Okay, close your eyes and
Mm-hmm.
tell me what time it is. No, really, close your eyes and tell me what time it is right
Mm-hmm.
now. What time? Uh huh. Okay. What? Well, given by. Okay.
Kind of having a hard time
When
doing
did
it.
we start talking?
Kind of having a hard time.
Okay. How long do you think we have talked?
It was after 12. Yeah, 12 p.m.
How much over an hour?
Um, it's been definitely over an
30
hour.
minutes, 50 minutes, 10 minutes? What do you think?
That I couldn't tell you
Maybe 50 minutes.
because every
15?
maybe 15
Okay.
minutes. Maybe 15 minutes. Yeah.
So what time do you think it is?
Yeah.
1:15? Open your eyes and look at your clock
Maybe
and tell me what time it is.
1:15-ish.
See what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
1:42. Yeah. It's very hard to know that timing. And I think that that's another thing that strikes me as obviously we don't have any way of knowing this, but could she have maybe left the home earlier than that time? But then it kind of that theory kind of stops because there is this report that she was seen in her bed maybe by her dad before he went to bed around what was it 12:30 in the morning or maybe 2:30 in the morning. So then it's kind of like, well, no, then she had
What
to have
time
still
did
been
she normally
there,
go to bed?
and
Do you
not
have that
left much
information?
earlier. So the information that they have is that when that evening she had actually taken a nap, that she was tired from that sleepover that she came from, and it may have been about maybe 6 p.m. when she took a nap. She woke up around between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. to the sound of a storm that rolled through the area. She joined the family in the living area where they were watching the All-Star basketball game. And then shortly thereafter, that's when the power was cut off. And then I think that's when the aunt and uncle sort of enter into the picture, and they're having this conversation. Mrs. Degree said she looks at the time and she's just like, okay, it's past 9 p.m. You guys need to go to bed because you've got school in the morning. They didn't take baths that evening because of the power outage. So they head to bed. But then we've got reports that she laid in the living area, Aisha did, until maybe midnight, in a t-shirt and jeans, and her father told her around midnight that she needed to go to bed, and in which she did. But she was the only one that appeared to still be up, and the assumption that for us is that she may have had trouble falling asleep because she took a nap that evening, and I guess scared of storms also, so she was not sleeping as well. So, and there's different theories, not different theories, but different sort of I don't want to say reporting, I guess, about how they went to bed. There's some reporting that they went to bed together. Her and her brother did because they share a room. And then there's the Shelby Star. It's been reported that she was still awake until midnight. So I'm looking at it as maybe she went to bed about midnight based off what the father said, and then he goes to the
Okay.
store about 11:30 p.m. and then returns at some point. And so that's kind of like I said, there's those inconsistencies that are happening. You're not really sure exactly
Was that a
what
normal
did happen.
bedtime? 9 o'clock.
No, that was not a normal bedtime.
Okay.
Apparently, their bedtime is normally around like 8 p.m. or something.
And I'm wondering,
It really seemed like what is it, the weather. It seemed like the weather is sort of what kind of made things inconsistent for this family that night. It was definitely not a night that they normally had. But with the power going off and then the rain that came in, the thunderstorm, they mentioned this all-star basketball game, which was a big deal for them to sit down and watch together. It seemed like those things sort of threw
okay,
them off a little bit.
when she looked at the clock, what clock did she look at?
You know, um, that's an interesting thing because if, obviously we've kind of all, I think, beat this with a dead horse. Is if the clocks go off, how do they know what time it is? And What type of clock did they have? Did they have a digital clock that, what would have started at midnight or 12 a.m. when the power came back on? But she did mention in the special that was wearing a watch on her wrist, which I had previously read before. But she did say that she looked at her watch and her watch said, oh, it's 9 p.m. and that's how she knew what time it was, which was kind of, like I said, new. That she was actually wearing one. I haven't read it really anywhere that there were any other clocks that would have been, working properly automatically, nor did they say that they set them or they had to reset them.
But you see
That
where,
wasn't
where I'm
added
going with this is,
that I
okay,
could tell.
well, I looked at the clock and it was 9 p.m. Okay. Which clock did you look at? I looked at the one on the wall. It's electric, yes. So it was truly 9 p.m. or how did you know, since the power would have been knocking out all the electron? You see where I'm going is devils lie in the details.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just an example of the kinds of things that would be helpful to kind of putting it all together, which is obvious. They have to think about this. And I asked you a little question a while ago about the time. All right, now let's go back to May 5th, 19. Now let's go back to May 5th, 2019 at 9 o'clock. Do you remember what happened? There we go. I don't remember what the hell happened last night, except I was working. And I looked, and again, I'm preparing some stuff for the book, and I think, okay, I'm going to bed at 10. It's about 9 o'clock. I'm going to bed at 10. I looked up at the clock on my screen, and it is 2 o'clock in the damn morning, and I'm going, holy cow, what? Time change. I hate time change, for one thing. So, hush. See, I told you the cat would have a word in. Uh, I think she secretly reads my notes and then she's got to put her 2 cents in. But nonetheless, so there's a lot of factors, and then sometimes it's as simple as the neighbor crawled in the window. Because I tell you, there was somebody asked me to assist them with a case that I would have sworn it was the adults in the house. I would have put money on it. But nobody mentioned that there's a boy next door who is got a behavior disorder, and he crawled in her window and killed her. Is the end result. But nonetheless, nobody mentioned that kid. So I'm like, well, look at, all roads lead to. So there's details. And then there's just common sense, and then there's I jacked it up, I mucked it up. So
Yeah.
Are
there any?
I'm sorry. This case is so easy to do with it because we got a lot of opinions here. We got a lot of thoughts, and we want this child to be found alive. We want this little girl to be found alive, healthy, and happy with a lollipop. And we're convinced that our answer is right, and we're convinced that if they would only look in the basement, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. Are there any other final thoughts that you want to share?
I just want to reiterate, I'm not blaming anyone, and I'm not saying anyone is responsible for this child, the people that we've discussed and such. And I do want to reiterate that this little girl is just that. She's a kid. She's an individual. She's a person. She deserves to live a happy, healthy life, and someone took it. This is somebody's little child. And that is the most important thing in this whole case, is that she is a little human being, pretty little kid, nice little kid, probably a little precocious, like all 9-year-olds can be. we want to know what happened to her because it makes us feel better, and it will make whoever did this to her come to, as we like to say, come to justice. But it's never going to be over for that family. There's no such thing as closure in a family touched by crime, and that's any crime. You get your purse stolen out of your car, or your little child is missing and found in a terrible circumstance. There's no closure. It will affect you the rest of your life. The commercial doesn't come on and something else happens.
Yeah, I agree. Tell us, how can people find out about you if they're interested, or they want to learn more about the book, or any workshops that you may be attending in the future?
Well, I do present in workshops. I do present and lecture on my expertise is a little here. Let me try this again. My website is www.judithayates.com, and that's where you can find my books. That's where you can contact me for media purposes, or if I can assist on a case. It's also where you can contact me for workshops, which I do either in person or online. Actually, I just got through doing a virtual workshop for a group on writing crime books, and it was so much fun. I haven't done a lot of the virtual ones, but it was fun. And I also do, in-person lectures, work. God, I am going all over the road with all of this. Let's try it again. My website is www.judithayates.com. I'm also on Facebook, so you can look me up there. I can't assist in a lot of cases. I can't assist you in being a better writer, but I can give you the tools where to look. So I should say that. I'm also available for lectures, presentations, and workshops. I've got a workshop coming up, in a couple of months now, on crime prevention for children. That's a private workshop, but I am available for that. So I would love to help you out, help groups spread the information. I should also say that my book about practical sense, self-defense, how to recognize the devil, I don't make money off that book. All the money goes to nonprofit organizations because I don't feel it's right to charge money to tell you how to be safe. So that's how to find me.
Well, awesome. We'll make sure that we include that in the show notes for everyone to follow up with you, because definitely have some great stuff. I'm kind of excited to even read one of your books that you mentioned. So I'm going to be doing that. How to Recognize the Devil sounds great. And then also The Devil That You Know. So again, we appreciate you for coming on and providing your expertise and your knowledge with your background with crime, and for also giving us a few takeaways here on the Asha Degree case.
Well, thank you. And I like what you're doing. I like the fact that you're open to all different ideas and thoughts. And I like the fact that you're keeping this little girl alive and the case alive by talking about it, because honestly, squeaky wheels get the grease. And if we advertise and we talk about a case, then we're keeping her alive.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Cleveland County Valentine. If you haven't already, please like and follow us on Facebook, or leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I would also like to encourage anyone who knows anything at all about Asha's disappearance to come forward and share what you know. I want this podcast to be an outlet for people surrounding this case. Have yourself a great rest of the week, and join us next time for a new episode of Cleveland County Valentine.